Imagine being the most powerful nation on earth. Your armies have conquered kingdoms, your enemies fear your name, and your leaders believe nothing can stop your rise. Then one day, word arrives that an enemy general is marching toward your homeland. At first, nobody is worried. The journey is impossible. Between him and your capital lie rivers, mountains, forests, and thousands of miles of hostile territory. No army could survive such a march, or so they thought. What happened next would become one of the greatest military achievements in history. An African commander from the powerful city of Carthage would lead tens of thousands of soldiers, thousands of horses, and even war elephants across some of the most dangerous terrain in Europe. He would invade Italy itself and bring mighty Rome closer to defeat than it had ever experienced before. His name was Hannibal. More than 2,000 years later, military academies around the world still study his tactics. Historians continue to debate his decisions. And Rome itself would never forget the fear he created. For nearly 2 decades, the most powerful republic in the ancient world lived under the shadow of one man. To understand why Hannibal became Rome's greatest nightmare, we must first travel to the city that produced him. Long before Rome dominated the Mediterranean, another power controlled much of the region's trade. That power was Carthage, a wealthy city located on the northern coast of Africa in present-day Tunisia. Carthage was not a small kingdom. It was one of the richest cities in the ancient world. Its merchants traded across vast distances. Its ships filled harbors throughout the Mediterranean. Gold, silver, ivory, and luxury goods flowed through its markets. While many nations struggled for survival, Carthage built an empire through trade and wealth. But prosperity often attracts rivals. Across the sea, another civilization was growing stronger every year. Rome had begun expanding beyond its borders. Its armies were disciplined, ambitious, and increasingly successful. As both powers grew, conflict became unavoidable. The struggle between Rome and Carthage would eventually become known as the Punic Wars. These wars were among the largest conflicts of the ancient world. Entire fleets were destroyed. Massive armies clashed. Thousands died fighting for control of the Mediterranean. The First Punic War ended in disaster for Carthage. Rome emerged victorious. Valuable territories were lost. Pride was shattered. Many Carthaginians never forgave Rome for what they saw as humiliation. Among those men was a military commander named Hannibal Barca. Hamilcar had a young son. According to ancient accounts, he brought the boy before an altar and demanded an oath. The child would swear eternal hostility toward Rome. Whether every detail of the story is true remains debated. But one thing is certain. The boy grew up believing Rome was Carthage's greatest enemy. That boy was Hannibal. From an early age he was surrounded by stories of war, defeat, and revenge. While other children played games, Hannibal learned strategy. While others dreamed of comfort, Hannibal prepared for conflict. The lessons of his youth would shape the future of Europe itself. As Hannibal grew older, he quickly proved he was more than the son of a famous commander. He possessed natural leadership, remarkable courage, and an ability to inspire loyalty among his soldiers. Men followed him not because they were forced to, but because they believed in him. He shared their hardships, marched beside them, and earned their respect in ways many commanders never could. After the death of his father, Carthaginian influence continued expanding in Spain. The region was rich in silver mines, fertile land, and valuable resources. For Carthage, Spain represented an opportunity to rebuild its strength after defeat. For Hannibal, it would become the launching point for one of the most daring military campaigns ever attempted. By his mid-20s, Hannibal had risen through the ranks and taken command of Carthaginian forces in Spain. Despite his young age, his reputation spread quickly. Soldiers admired him. Allies trusted him. Enemies learned to fear him. He possessed a rare combination of intelligence, discipline, and boldness. But Hannibal was not interested in simply defending territory. He wanted something far greater. He wanted to strike directly at Rome itself. Most military leaders would have chosen the obvious route. They would have sailed across the Mediterranean and attacked by sea. It was faster, safer, and more predictable. Hannibal rejected that idea. Rome possessed a powerful navy. A direct invasion could easily fail before it even began. Instead, he considered a route so dangerous that many believed it was impossible. Rather than attack from the sea, he would attack from the land. He would march straight into the heart of enemy territory. The plan shocked even his own supporters. Between Hannibal and Italy stood hundreds of miles of hostile territory. Rivers would need to be crossed. Mountain tribes would need to be confronted. Food would need to be secured. Every step carried enormous risk. Yet Hannibal believed surprise could become his greatest weapon. In 218 BC, the campaign finally began. Hannibal assembled an army of roughly 50,000 infantry, thousands of cavalry, and dozens of war elephants. To many people, the sight must have seemed unbelievable. Never before had such a force attempted a journey of this scale. As the army moved north, difficulties appeared almost immediately. Local tribes resisted their advance. Supplies became harder to obtain. Soldiers faced exhausting marches through unfamiliar lands, yet Hannibal pressed forward. Every obstacle strengthened his determination. Many commanders would have turned back. Others would have settled for easier victories. Hannibal did neither. He understood that history rewards boldness. If he succeeded, Rome would face a threat unlike anything it had ever encountered. If he failed, he and his army would likely disappear into the mountains forever. Then the Alps appeared on the horizon. Towering, snow-covered, and terrifying, they represented one of the greatest natural barriers in Europe. Even today, crossing them can be difficult. For an ancient army carrying weapons, supplies, horses, and elephants, the challenge seemed almost impossible. Many Roman leaders believed the mountains would stop him. They assumed nature itself would do what armies could not. They expected cold, hunger, and exhaustion to destroy the invaders long before they reached Italy. In Rome, few people truly believed Hannibal would make it across. But Hannibal had built his reputation on doing what others considered impossible. As his army approached the mountains, he encouraged his men with promises of glory and victory. Beyond those peaks, he reminded them, lay the lands of Rome. The climb began. Narrow paths twisted along steep cliffs. Ice covered the ground. Snowstorms reduced visibility. One mistake could send men and animals plunging to their deaths. Progress became painfully slow. Every mile demanded extraordinary effort. Then came the attacks. Mountain tribes struck from hidden positions above. Rocks crashed down onto the marching columns. Ambushes erupted without warning. Soldiers who survived the harsh terrain now faced deadly enemies as well. The losses mounted quickly. Men died from combat. Others froze in the cold. Horses slipped and vanished into ravines. Supplies were abandoned. What had begun as a massive army was slowly being reduced by nature itself. Even the famous war elephants suffered. These enormous animals had never been intended for such conditions. The freezing temperatures, steep paths, and lack of food took a terrible toll. Yet somehow, Some of them continued moving forward. For days, the army fought not against Rome, but against the mountains. Hunger became constant. Exhaustion became normal. Every sunrise brought new dangers. Every sunset reminded the soldiers how far they still had to go. At several points, disaster seemed inevitable. Entire sections of mountain paths collapsed beneath the army. Progress nearly stopped. Some soldiers began losing hope. Others wondered if they would ever see home again. But Hannibal refused to quit. He moved among his men, encouraging them, sharing their hardships, and convincing them that survival was still possible. Great leaders are tested during victories. Legendary leaders are tested during disasters. Finally, after one of the most extraordinary marches in military history, Hannibal and the survivors emerged from the Alps. The cost had been enormous. Thousands had died. Much of the army had been lost. But the impossible had happened. Hannibal had crossed the mountains, and now he stood in Italy itself. News traveled quickly across Italy. An enemy army had crossed the Alps. At first, many Romans refused to believe it. The story sounded too ridiculous to be true. How could thousands of soldiers, horses, and elephants survive such a journey? But as reports continued arriving, disbelief turned into concern. Hannibal was not a rumor. He was real, and he was already inside Roman territory. For generations, Rome had grown accustomed to victory. Its armies were disciplined, experienced, and feared throughout the Mediterranean. Roman leaders believed that if Hannibal could somehow be brought into battle, he would be defeated like every other enemy before him. They were about to learn a painful lesson. Hannibal understood something many Roman commanders did not. Winning a war was not simply about having more soldiers. It was about choosing the right battlefield, exploiting weaknesses, and forcing the enemy to fight on your terms. Strategy, not numbers, would become his greatest weapon. The first major confrontation came near the Ticinus River. Roman forces moved to intercept the invaders before they could establish themselves in Italy. Confident in their superiority, the Romans expected a quick victory. Instead, they encountered Hannibal's highly skilled cavalry. The battle was short, but shocking. Hannibal's cavalry outmaneuvered the Romans and inflicted serious losses. More importantly, the engagement demonstrated that this was not an ordinary enemy. The Roman army had expected a desperate survivor from the Alps. Instead, they faced a brilliant commander eager for battle. The defeat sent a clear message across Italy. Hannibal had survived the mountains. His army was still dangerous, and Rome's confidence had suffered its first crack. What had seemed impossible only months earlier was now becoming reality. Soon after, another opportunity appeared. Roman forces positioned themselves near the Trebia River, hoping to stop Hannibal before his influence grew. The Romans had larger numbers and believed victory was within reach. Hannibal had a different plan. Understanding the terrain perfectly, Hannibal devised a trap. He used cavalry attacks and calculated maneuvers to lure Roman forces into unfavorable conditions. Cold weather, freezing water, and exhaustion weakened the Romans before the battle had even fully begun. Then the trap closed. Hidden troops emerged. Cavalry attacked from unexpected directions. Confusion spread through Roman ranks. What began as a confident advance quickly became a struggle for survival. The Battle of Trebia ended in another Roman disaster. Thousands of Roman soldiers were killed, captured, or scattered. Hannibal had now defeated Roman armies twice. Across Italy, people began asking a question that once seemed unthinkable. Could Rome actually lose this war? With each victory, Hannibal gained something almost as valuable as territory. He gained reputation. Stories of his achievements spread rapidly. Some communities began reconsidering their loyalty to Rome. Others watched carefully, waiting to see whether the Carthaginian commander could continue winning. Roman leaders, however, remained determined. They believed a larger army would solve the problem. More soldiers were recruited. More resources were committed. Rome had faced setbacks before, and always recovered. Yet Hannibal was preparing another surprise. The next major clash would occur near Lake Trasimene in central Italy. The location offered exactly what Hannibal wanted. Hills surrounded the area. Visibility was limited. The terrain created opportunities for concealment and deception. Roman commander Gaius Flaminius pursued Hannibal aggressively. He believed speed was essential. The faster he engaged the enemy, the faster Rome could restore its reputation. Unfortunately for him, Hannibal anticipated every move. Before dawn, Carthaginian troops quietly positioned themselves around the battlefield. Hidden among hills and forests, they waited in silence. The Romans marched forward, unaware that they were walking directly into one of history's most famous ambushes. As the Roman army entered the trap, the attack began. Warriors emerged from multiple directions. Trumpets sounded. Soldiers rushed from concealment. Panic erupted almost instantly. Many Romans never even had time to organize for battle. The result was devastating. Thousands of Roman soldiers were killed. Many were trapped against the lake. Others attempted to flee, only to encounter enemy forces waiting ahead. The Roman army effectively ceased to exist. Historians often describe Lake Trasimene as one of the greatest ambushes ever executed. Hannibal had once again defeated a larger Roman force through planning, patience, and tactical brilliance. The victories were no longer accidents. They were becoming a pattern. When news reached Rome, fear spread throughout the city. Citizens crowded public spaces seeking information. The Roman Senate recognized the seriousness of the crisis. Extraordinary measures were required. A new leader was appointed to deal with the threat. His name was Quintus Fabius Maximus. Fabius understood something many Roman commanders had ignored. Fighting Hannibal directly was dangerous. The Carthaginian commanders seemed to win every major battle. Therefore, Fabius adopted a completely different strategy. Instead of confronting Hannibal head-on, Fabius chose to avoid major battles. He harassed supply lines, monitored enemy movements, and slowly wore down Carthaginian resources. Many Romans hated the approach. They wanted decisive action. Critics mocked Fabius for appearing cautious. Some called him weak. Others accused him of cowardice. Yet Fabius believed patience offered the best chance of survival. He understood that pride could destroy armies faster than enemy swords. For a time, the strategy worked. Hannibal remained dangerous, but he could not force Rome into the kind of battle he preferred. The war slowed. Frustration grew on both sides, yet many Romans demanded a more aggressive approach. Eventually, political pressure became overwhelming. Roman leaders decided they had endured enough caution. A massive army would be assembled. This force would seek out Hannibal and crush him, once and for all. The army that Rome assembled was enormous by ancient standards. Tens of thousands of soldiers marched beneath Roman banners. The message was clear. The Republic intended to end Hannibal's campaign permanently. Many Romans welcomed the decision. Surely, they argued, no commander could defeat such a force. The sheer size of the army seemed overwhelming. Confidence returned. Optimism spread. The nightmare would soon be over. Hannibal watched these developments carefully. He understood exactly what was happening. Rome believed numbers alone could guarantee victory. Once again, the Romans were preparing to fight the war Hannibal wanted them to fight. The two armies would soon meet near a small town called Cannae. What happened there would become one of the most studied battles in military history. Even today, commanders around the world analyze every detail. At Cannae, Hannibal would face one of the largest Roman armies ever assembled. The odds appeared impossible. Yet within a single day he would achieve a victory so extraordinary that historians still struggle to believe it happened. The morning of the Battle of Cannae began with confidence on the Roman side. Never before had Rome assembled such a massive force against a single enemy. Ancient sources suggest that more than 80,000 Roman and allied soldiers stood ready for battle. Their commanders believed victory was finally within reach. Hannibal's army was smaller, outnumbered, and far from home. To many Romans, the outcome seemed obvious. But Hannibal had spent years studying how Romans fought. He understood their strengths. More importantly, he understood their weaknesses. Roman commanders often relied on overwhelming force. When they sensed an advantage, they pushed forward aggressively. Hannibal planned to use that confidence against them. As the battle began, Hannibal arranged his troops in an unusual formation. Instead of placing his strongest soldiers in the center, he positioned forces that would gradually fall back under pressure. To Roman commanders, this appeared to be a sign of weakness. It was exactly what Hannibal wanted them to believe. The Romans attacked with tremendous force. Thousands surged forward, driving into the Carthaginian center. As expected, Hannibal's front line slowly retreated. Roman soldiers believed they were winning. The enemy appeared to be collapsing before their eyes. But the retreat was controlled. Every step had been planned. Hannibal's center bent inward like a bow being drawn. The more the Romans advanced, the deeper they moved into the trap. Most had no idea what was happening around them. Then came the critical moment. Hannibal's strongest infantry units, positioned on the flanks, began pushing inward. At the same time, his cavalry achieved a decisive victory against Roman horsemen and swept around the battlefield. Suddenly, Roman soldiers found themselves attacked from multiple directions. The army that had begun the battle advancing confidently was now being surrounded. The trap that Hannibal had carefully constructed was closing. What happened next became one of the most famous tactical maneuvers in military history. Hannibal's forces completed a double envelopment, surrounding the Roman army almost entirely. The hunters had become the hunted. The battlefield turned into chaos. Thousands of Roman soldiers were packed together so tightly that many could barely move. Some could not raise their weapons. Others could only watch as the circle around them continued shrinking. Hour after hour, the slaughter continued. Roman discipline and courage could not overcome the situation. The more they struggled, the more hopeless their position became. Hannibal's trap had worked perfectly. By the end of the day, the scale of the disaster was almost unimaginable. Tens of thousands of Roman soldiers lay dead. Some ancient accounts place the number at around 50,000 or more. Entire generations of military-aged men were wiped out in a single battle. The Battle of Cannae was not merely a victory. It was a masterpiece. Historians still study it, because Hannibal defeated a much larger force through strategy, timing, and discipline. Few commanders in history have ever achieved anything comparable. When news of the defeat reached Rome, shock spread throughout the Republic. Families waited desperately for information. Many never received good news. Entire communities lost fathers, sons, brothers, and friends. Fear gripped the city. Some believed Hannibal would march directly on Rome. Others feared the Republic itself might collapse. The confidence that had once defined Roman power was replaced by uncertainty. For the first time in centuries, Rome faced a terrifying possibility. Defeat. Not a temporary setback, not a lost province. Complete defeat. Hannibal had pushed the Republic closer to destruction than any foreign commander before or after him. Across the Mediterranean, people watched closely. Allies reconsidered their loyalties. Enemies sensed opportunity. Some Italian cities abandoned Rome and sided with Hannibal. The balance of power appeared to be shifting. At this moment, Hannibal stood at the height of his power. He had crossed the Alps. He had destroyed multiple Roman armies. He had won one of history's greatest battles. His reputation spread far beyond Italy. Many people expected him to march straight to Rome and finish the war. Even some of his own officers believed the opportunity had arrived. The enemy was wounded. The road seemed open. Victory appeared within reach. But Hannibal made a decision that historians continue debating more than 2,000 years later. He did not march directly on Rome. Why? The answer remains complicated. His army had suffered losses. He lacked sufficient siege equipment. Reinforcements were uncertain. Attacking a heavily defended city was far different from defeating armies in the field. Hannibal may have believed Rome would eventually surrender, or negotiate. After so many defeats, that assumption seemed reasonable. Yet the Romans responded in a way few enemies ever had. Rome refused to surrender. Rome refused to negotiate. Rome refused to accept defeat. Instead, the Republic did something extraordinary. It rebuilt. New armies were raised. New commanders were appointed. New strategies were developed. While Hannibal remained dangerous, Rome remained determined. The war entered a new phase. Hannibal continued winning battles and maintaining influence across parts of Italy. Yet each year brought new challenges. Supplies became harder to secure. Reinforcements remained limited. Meanwhile, Rome adapted. Roman commanders avoided reckless confrontations. They learned from previous mistakes. Slowly but steadily, they began reducing Hannibal's advantages. The Republic also expanded the war beyond Italy. Roman forces attacked Carthaginian positions in Spain and elsewhere, forcing Hannibal's homeland to defend itself on multiple fronts. Years passed. Hannibal remained respected, feared, and undefeated in many encounters. Yet the strategic situation gradually shifted. The commander who had once terrified Rome now found himself fighting a longer and more difficult struggle. Then a new Roman leader emerged, a commander who had studied Hannibal carefully, a commander determined not just to survive, but to defeat him. His name was Scipio, and he would eventually challenge the greatest military genius of his age. The man who would eventually challenge Hannibal was unlike many Roman commanders who came before him. His name was Scipio. While others focused on revenge, Scipio focused on understanding. He studied Hannibal's tactics, his strengths, and his methods. Rather than repeating old mistakes, he sought to learn from the enemy who had humbled Rome again and again. As Hannibal remained in Italy, Scipio carried the war elsewhere. Roman forces launched campaigns in Spain, attacking territories that had long supported Carthage. These victories weakened Carthage's resources and reduced its ability to reinforce Hannibal's army. Step by step, Rome began recovering from the disasters that had once seemed fatal. The Republic's strength had never been a single army or a single commander. Its strength was its ability to endure setbacks and continue fighting. Years passed. Hannibal remained one of the most dangerous men in the world. But time was no longer working in his favor. His victories had been extraordinary, yet they had not delivered a final blow against Rome. Then Rome made a bold decision. Instead of waiting for Hannibal to attack again, Roman leaders chose to carry the war directly into Africa. If Carthage itself came under threat, Hannibal might be forced to leave Italy. The strategy worked. As Roman armies approached Carthaginian territory, panic spread among Carthage's leaders. The city that had once challenged Rome now faced invasion itself. Desperate messages were sent to Hannibal. After spending more than 15 years campaigning in Italy, Hannibal received orders he never wanted to hear. He was to return home. The war that had defined much of his life was entering its final chapter. For many of his soldiers, the moment was emotional. They had followed him across mountains, through battles, and across foreign lands. Together they had achieved feats that seemed impossible. Now they were leaving Italy behind. Back in Africa, preparations began for the final confrontation. Two of the greatest military minds of the ancient world were about to meet face to face. Hannibal and Scipio, Carthage and Rome. The stakes could not have been higher. The decisive battle would take place near a place called Zama in 2000 BC. Historians still debate many details, but there is no question about its importance. The future of the Mediterranean hung in the balance. Before the fighting began, ancient accounts suggest that Hannibal and Scipio may have met in person. If true, it would have brought together two legendary commanders, standing on opposite sides of history. When the battle finally started, Hannibal attempted to use many of the tactics that had served him so well throughout his career. But this time, he faced an opponent who had studied him carefully and adapted accordingly. Scipio anticipated several of Hannibal's moves. Roman troops responded with greater discipline than many previous armies. The battle remained fierce, but the conditions that had once favored Hannibal were no longer the same. For the first time in his military career, Hannibal faced a commander capable of matching his strategic thinking. The contest was no longer between genius and overconfidence. It was between two brilliant minds. As the battle continued, momentum gradually shifted toward Rome. Carthaginian forces fought bravely, but Scipio's planning and execution proved decisive. The tide could not be reversed. The Battle of Zama ended in Roman victory. Carthage was defeated. The long struggle between the two powers had finally reached its conclusion. Rome had survived its greatest threat. For Hannibal, the defeat was devastating. The commander who had crossed the Alps and shattered Roman armies had finally been beaten. Yet even in defeat, his reputation remained unmatched. The war's outcome transformed the ancient world. Rome emerged stronger than ever before. Carthage lost much of its power and influence. The balance of power shifted decisively in Rome's favor. Hannibal did not immediately disappear from history. In the years that followed, he remained active in politics and diplomacy. But Rome never stopped viewing him as a threat. Eventually, Roman pressure followed him wherever he went. Kingdoms that offered him refuge faced demands from Rome. The shadow of his reputation remained powerful, even decades after his greatest victories. According to historical accounts, Hannibal ultimately chose death over capture. Rather than allow Rome the satisfaction of parading him as a prisoner, he took control of his own fate. His life ended far from the battlefields that made him famous. Yet his story was far from over. Long after his death, military leaders continued studying his campaigns. Generals admired his creativity. Strategists examined his victories. Historians debated his decisions. Few commanders have influenced military thinking for as long as Hannibal. The crossing of the Alps became legendary. The Battle of Cannae became a textbook example of battlefield encirclement. His ability to inspire loyalty became a model for leadership. Even today, when military professionals discuss history's greatest commanders, Hannibal's name almost always appears near the top of the list. His achievements remain extraordinary by any standard. What makes his story remarkable is not simply the battles he won. It is the obstacles he overcame. He crossed mountains that many considered impassable. He defeated armies that outnumbered him. He challenged a republic at the height of its ambition. For years, Rome feared him. Mothers frightened children with stories about him. Politicians worried about him. Generals studied him. Few individuals have ever cast such a long shadow over a powerful nation. And perhaps that is why his story still fascinates people more than 2,000 years later. It reminds us that determination, intelligence, and courage can sometimes overcome overwhelming odds. The African general from Carthage never destroyed Rome, but he accomplished something almost as remarkable. He forced one of history's greatest powers to question its own invincibility. His name was Hannibal Barca, the commander who crossed the Alps, the master of Cannae, the nightmare of Rome, and the African general who terrified Europe.